The hostess stopped me before I could take another step. "I'm sorry, sir," she said gently, her smile tight and practiced. "You're not on the list." For a moment, I thought she was talking to someone behind me. I turned slightly, then realized her eyes were still on mine. Calm, polite, final. Behind her, through the tall glass doors of the private dining room, I could see balloons floating near the ceiling. Blue and gold. A long table, lauder, a cake shaped like a soccer field. And right there, standing on his chair, was my grandson. 8 years old today. My best friend. Celebrating his birthday with dozens of people I didn't recognize. I leaned closer to the glass, my heart lifting just for a second when I saw him smile. He was wearing the navy button-down I'd bought him last Christmas. The one he said made him look grown up. "I'm his grandfather," I said softly. "I just need a minute. I have something for him." The hostess glanced back at her clipboard, then up at me again. Her smile didn't change. "I'm really sorry. We're at capacity, and your name isn't on the guest list." The words settled slowly, like dust. Capacity, guest list. I reached into my jacket pocket without thinking, my fingers brushing against the small box I'd holding onto all afternoon. Inside was a compass, brass, heavy. Engraved on the back with words I'd rehearsed saying out loud. "Always find your way home." I'd planned to give it to him after cake, maybe pull him aside for a moment. Just the two of us. Watch his face light up the way it always did when something with a story attached. "There must be a mistake," I said. "I paid for this party 2 weeks ago. $6,400, her eyes flickered. "Just for a second, I'll get the host," she said quickly. "Please wait here." She disappeared into the room, and the laughter spilled out when the door opened. Music, the clink of glasses. A man's voice raised in a toast. I stayed where I was, standing in the marble entryway of a restaurant I'd been coming to for over 20 years. I'd celebrated my daughter's graduation here. Her engagement. The night she told me she was pregnant. Back then, the place felt warm. Familiar. Tonight in my pressed khakis and old leather shoes, I felt like I didn't belong. Through the glass, I watched as someone gently guided my grandson away from the door, turning his shoulders so he wouldn't see me. He didn't resist. He trusted the adults around him. That hurt more than I expected. A minute later, my daughter appeared. Her face went pale when she saw me. Her husband followed behind her, calm as ever, one hand resting lightly on her back. "Dad," she said. "This is awkward." I looked at her. Really looked. She couldn't meet my eyes. "I was told I'm not on the list," I said. "Even though I paid for the party." Her hands twisted together. "We had to cap it," she said quickly. "The restaurant has a fire limit. And there were so many people from his work." I finished. Her husband smiled politely. The kind of smile that never quite reached his eyes. "This party is really about the kids," he said. "Friends from school. Families we spend time with. I'm sure you understand." I did understand. I understood that didn't fit the picture they were trying to present. The retired man with the old truck. The small house. The quiet life. I just wanted to give him his gift. I said. My daughter shook her head. "No's not a good time. He's about to do the cake." I looked past them, through the glass, and saw my grandson his neck toward the door. For a split second our eyes almost met. Almost. "All right," I said. I turned back to the hostess, who stood nearby pretending not to listen. "Thank you for your time." Then I faced my daughter again. "I hope the party is everything you wanted," I said evenly, "because that's all I have left to give." Her face drained of color. I walked out into the evening without looking back. The air was warm, but I felt cold all over. The compass in my pocket felt heavier with every step. I made it halfway across the parking lot before my legs started to shake. I sat in my truck for a long time before turning the key. Through the windshield I watched families walk toward the restaurant. Parents holding gifts. Kids laughing. Everyone exactly where they were supposed to be. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles hurt, and let the tears come quietly. Not the kind that make noise. Just the kind that slip down your face when you finally stop holding everything in. My phone buzzed. My daughter's name lit up the screen. Then again. And again. I didn't answer. I drove home instead. The house felt emptier than usual when I walked in. Too quiet. I set my keys down and stared at the refrigerator, at the photos held up by cheap magnets. Me and my grandson fishing. Me holding him as a baby. My daughter at her college graduation, smiling so wide it hurt to look at. I'd raised her alone after her mother passed, worked overtime. Took extra shifts. Promised myself she'd never feel abandoned. Somewhere along the way, I forgot to make that promise to myself. I went out to the garage and sat on the old stool by my workbench. The smell of sawdust was comforting. Familiar. I opened a drawer to grab a rag, and there was a folded piece of construction paper. I unfolded it slowly. Stick figures. Bright crayon colors. A tall one labeled Grandpa. A smaller one with a soccer ball. At the top, in crooked letters, my hero. I closed my eyes and pressed the paper to my chest. My phone buzzed again. Then again. Fine. Of the time I hung up, my hands were steady. I wasn't angry. I was done shrinking. The next few days were quiet. Too quiet. I kept busy. Fixed a loose cabinet hinge. Mowed the lawn. Met an old friend for coffee. Then, 3 days later, there was a knock at my door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, my daughter stood there, looking like she hadn't slept. No makeup. Hair pulled back hastily. Her eyes were red. "Can I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She didn't make it 2 steps into the living room before she started crying. Not dramatic, just exhausted. "I'm sorry," she said. "I don't know how I let it get this bad." I waited. She sank onto the couch, wiping her face with her sleeve. "He said you didn't fit," she whispered. "That it would look bad. That people would ask questions. And you agreed," I said, quieted. "I was scared," she said. "Of fighting. Of losing everything." "You already lost something," I said. "And you hurt your son." Her shoulders shook. "He thinks you don't love him anymore," she said. That was the moment something broke inside me. I took a breath. "This changes," I said. "But it changes with boundaries." She nodded frantically. That night, I spoke to my grandson on the phone. He cried when he heard my voice. "I thought you didn't want to come," he said. "I always want to come," I told him. Always. It took time after that. Hard conversations, therapy, apologies that weren't easy to hear, but slowly, things shifted. My grandson started coming over every Thursday afternoon. Just us. We built things, cookies, talked about school. One day, he pulled the compass out of his pocket. "I don't hide this anymore," he said. I smiled through tears. A year later, he asked if he could have his birthday at my house. "Just family," he said. "That's what matters." On the day of the party, were no chandeliers, no waitstaff, no guest list. Just a cake on my kitchen table. Laughter in the living room. 10 people who wanted to be there. When my grandson blew out the candles, he looked at me and grinned. "This is the best birthday ever," he said. And for the first time in a long time, I believed I was exactly where I belonged. When the last candle went out, everyone clapped, but I barely heard it. All I could see was my grandson's face, relaxed, happy, unguarded. The kind of joy that doesn't come from decorations or noise, but from knowing you're safe where you are. He leaned over and whispered, "Grandpa, can I tell you something?" "Anything," I said. "I was scared last year," he admitted. "When you weren't there. I thought maybe I did something wrong." My chest tightened. "You didn't," I said immediately. "Not ever." He nodded like he believed me now. That mattered more than the cake, the gifts, all of it. After the guests left and the house grew quiet again, I stood alone in the kitchen, rinsing plates in the sink. The night air drifted in through the open window, crickets. Distant laughter from somewhere down the block. I thought back to that night at the restaurant. The glass doors. The clipboard, the word, capacity. I realized something then that had taken me far too long to learn. Being allowed into a room is not the same as being wanted in someone's life. For years I'd confused the two. I had believed that as long as I kept giving money, time, forgiveness, I'd earn my place. That love was something you maintained like a subscription. Miss a payment, and you'd be quietly cut off. But love doesn't work like that. Real love doesn't keep lists. It doesn't cap capacity. And it doesn't ask you make yours smaller so others can feel bigger. The following weeks weren't perfect, healing never is. My daughter and I talked more honestly than we ever had before. Sometimes those conversations ended in silence. Sometimes in tears. But they always ended with truth, and always new for us. Her husband stayed distant. Polite, careful. He no longer spoke for her, and I no longer allowed him to. I learned how much peace comes from not arguing your worth. My grandson kept coming over. Thursdays became our thing. Rain or shine. One afternoon, while we were sanding a piece of wood together, he looked up at me and said, "Grandpa, you know you're my favorite grown up. Right?" I laughed. "You don't have to rank people." "I know," he said seriously. "I just want you to know." That night, after he left, I sat in my garage long after the lights were off. Thinking about all the moments I almost missed because I was afraid of being inconvenient. I thought about how many people walk through quietly accepting less than they deserve, simply because they love someone. Love doesn't mean self-erasure. It took me 65 years to understand that. If you're watching this, and you've ever stood outside a door you helped build, feeling invisible, I see you. If you've ever paid the price for peace and still weren't invited to the table, you're not alone. And if you've been taught that your value is measured by what you provide instead of who you are, let me tell you what my grandson taught me. The people who matter don't need a list to remember you. They just need you to show up as yourself. And if they don't make room for that, no matter how painful it is, it's okay to walk away with your dignity intact. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is stop knocking on doors that were never meant to open for you. Because somewhere else, maybe smaller, maybe quieter, there's a place where you're already home. I didn't share this story for sympathy. I shared it because I know how many people are living a version of it right now. People who show up quietly. People who give without being asked. People who keep forgiving because they believe love means endurance. For a long time I thought being strong meant staying silent. I was wrong. Strength, I learned, is knowing when to stop begging for a seat and start building your own table. Weeks after that birthday, my grandson and I were sitting on the front steps, watching the sun dip behind the trees. He was kicking his legs, humming to himself. "Grandpa," he said suddenly, "do you think people know when they hurt someone?" I thought about that for a moment. "Sometimes," I said. "And sometimes they don't want to know." He nodded, like that made sense. "Then I'm glad you didn't disappear," he said. "Because that would have hurt more." That's when I understood something important. Walking away doesn't always mean leaving forever. Sometimes it means stepping back far enough for others to finally see the space you filled. My daughter still carries guilt. I can see it in the way she hesitates before speaking now. In the way she listens more than she talks. She's learning, slowly, that love isn't about image or approval, it's about presence. We're rebuilding, one honest conversation at a time. And my grandson, he's thriving. He keeps the compass on his nightstand now. Not hidden, not tucked away, right where he can see it. Every once in a while, when he hugs me goodbye, he taps his pocket and says, "I know where home is." So do I. Home isn't a restaurant, it isn't a guest list, it isn't a check you write hoping it buys you belonging. Home is where you are wanted without conditions. Where your name doesn't need to be printed. Where love doesn't come with fine print. If you've ever felt erased, remember this. You don't lose your worth because someone fails to recognize it, and you don't need permission to protect your heart. Sometimes, the moment you stop chasing acceptance is the moment you finally find peace. I did. And I hope, if you're listening to this, that one day soon, you will too. There's one more thing I need to say. Because endings like this can sound neat when you hear them all at once, tied up with wisdom and quiet music in the background. Real life doesn't move that cleanly. There are still days when it stings. There are moments when I remember the glass doors of that restaurant. The way my grandson's laugh sounded muffled through them, and my chest tightens all over again. Healing doesn't erase memory. It just changes what the memory has power over. What did change was how I see myself. I no longer introduce my worth by what I can pay for, I no longer apologize for taking up space. And I no longer mistake access for love. My grandson doesn't ask me how much things cost, he asks me how things work. He asks me to tell stories, he asks me to stay. That's how I know I matter. Last week, he asked me something that caught me off guard. "Grandpa," he said, "why do some grown-ups care so much about looking important?" I smiled a little and shook my head. Sometimes they forget that being important and being loved aren't the same thing. He thought about that, then said, "I think being loved is better." Out of the loves of children. If I could go back to that night, standing in the marble entryway with my name missing from a clipboard, I wouldn't argue. I wouldn't explain. I wouldn't prove anything. I would still walk away. Not because I didn't belong, but because I finally understood where I did. If this story feels familiar, if it reminds you of a moment you still carry quietly, I want you to hear this clearly. You don't have to disappear to keep the peace. You don't have to overgive to earn love. And you don't have to stay where you are tolerated instead of cherished. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is choose yourself without bitterness, without revenge, and without shame. Just dignity. Just truth. Just enough courage to believe that the people who truly love you will never need a list to remember your name. And if they forget it anyway, it's okay to leave the building. Take a deep breath, and walk back toward the place where you are already home. After everything that happened, I used to ask myself a quiet question late at night. When the house was still and the memories crept in. Why did it take being locked out for me to finally see the truth? I think it's because love, real love, can blind you when you're afraid of losing it. You convince yourself that endurance is the same as devotion. That silence is strength. That if you just give a little more, bend a little further, everything will hold together. But love that requires you to erase yourself isn't love. It's fear wearing a familiar face. I wish someone had told me that years ago. I wish I had understood that setting boundaries doesn't mean you love less. It means you love honestly. It means you stop teaching people that your needs don't matter. My grandson never asked me to be invisible. He never asked me to be smaller. He never asked me to earn my place in his life. He just wanted me there. And maybe that's the lesson I needed all along. That the people who truly need you won't measure your value by appearances, by money, or by how convenient you are to their image. They'll measure it by how safe they feel when you walk into a room. Today, when I look around my home, I don't see what it lacks. I see what it holds. Lauder in the garage. Crayon drawings on the fridge. The quiet comfort knowing I don't have to perform to be loved here. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt pushed aside, quietly replaced, or slowly phased out of a life build, please hear me. You are not disposable. You are not outdated. And you are not wrong for wanting respect. Sometimes the door closes not to punish you, but to redirect you back to yourself. I walked away from that restaurant believing I had lost something. What I didn't know then was that I was about to gain something far more important. My voice, my boundaries, my peace. And a grandson who knows, without question, that his grandpa will always show up, not because he paid his way in, but because love doesn't need permission to belong. That's the part no one puts on a guest list. And that's the part that lasts. There's a quiet freedom that comes when you stop explaining yourself. I used to rehearse conversations in my head, what I'd say if I was questioned, how I'd justify my presence, how I'd soften my words so no one felt uncomfortable. I don't do that anymore. Not because I'm hardened, but because I finally trust that the right people don't need convincing. My grandson never did. A few nights ago, he stayed over. We built a blanket fort in the living room. The kind that collapses if you breathe too hard. We lay there with a flashlight, shadows dancing on the ceiling. "Grandpa," he said, "do you think people can change?" "I think they can," I answered. "If they want to. And if they're willing to tell the truth about what they've done." He nodded, thoughtful. "I think you're brave." I laughed softly. "I don't feel brave." "You walked away," he said. "That's brave." I didn't tell him how scared I was that night. How walking away felt like stepping into dark without a map. He didn't need that part. He already understood the ending. The truth is, walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning of choosing myself without closing my heart. Of loving without surrendering my dignity. Of showing my grandson what self-respect looks when no one is applauding. Some days are still quiet. Some memories still ache. But the achy no longer defines me. I wake up knowing where I stand, I sleep knowing where I belong. And when I think back to the hostess and the clipboard, and not on the list, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel clarity. Because I finally learned this. Not every door is meant to open. Not every room is meant to open. And not every table deserves your presence. But the ones that do, the small rooms, the simple tables. The people who see you without asking for proof, those are worth everything. That's Winnaby, showing up, standing tall. And never again mistaking exclusion for my own absence. I was always here. I just needed to remember that. Sometimes I imagine what that hostess remembers from that night. Probably nothing more than a name not on a list, another awkward moment in a long shift. To her it was procedural. To me, it was a turning point. That's the strange thing about moments that change your life. To the world they're ordinary. To you, they divide everything into before and after. Before, I believed love was proven by endurance. After, I learned love was proven by presence and by boundaries. I don't replay the scene as often anymore. When I do, it ends differently now. Not with humiliation, but with resolve. I see myself turn, feel the weight of the compass in my pocket, and choose not to plead my way into a room that couldn't recognize me. I chose myself instead. And in doing that, I didn't lose my grandson. I became the person he could trust again. The person who showed him that dignity isn't loud, but it is unmovable. If you're still listening, maybe it's because a part of this story belongs to you. Maybe you've stood outside a door you helped build. Maybe you've loved someone who mistook your generosity for obligation. Maybe you've wondered when it became okay to disappear quietly for the sake of harmony. Let this be your reminder. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to say no. You are allowed to leave without explaining your worth. And when you do, You might find, like I did, that the people who truly matter don't ask you to shrink. They make room, they pull up a chair. They save you a slice of cake. They know your name without checking a list. That's where I'll keep choosing to stand. Right here. And if this is where the story ends, then let it end here. Not with bitterness. Not with regret, but with clarity. I walked away from a door that closed in my face, and in doing so, I finally opened one inside myself. A door that led back to who I was before I started believing love had to be earned, before I confused sacrifice with worth. My grandson didn't need a perfect party. He needed a grandfather who stayed true to himself. And I didn't need a seat at a fancy table. I needed the courage to stand up and leave when respect was missing. So if you remember nothing else from this story, remember this. You are not invisible because someone fails to see you. You are not replaceable because someone chooses convenience over love. And you are not wrong for walking away from a place that makes you feel small. Sometimes the bravest, most loving thing you can do is step out of the room, hold your head high, and go back to the people and the life that know your value without being reminded. I wasn't on the list that night. But I was never lost, I was always home.